abandon all hope, ye who enter here.
I received a call from Terry and Johnny about an incident that occurred both Saturday and Sunday nights. I'm going to type up my own summary in my own words of the conversation. Terry and Johnny have a cabin near the North Carolina-Tennessee line. Saturday night, they were both outside sitting on their decks when at exactly 7:50 p.m., two Neanderthals appeared. Their words, not mine, from the tree line directly in front of their home facing them. Terry described them both as being tall, lanky men who were both facially deformed and had hairy patches here and there all around their naked bodies. She said their eyes were too large for their faces, but their cranium was tilted to the left side, like its head had grown incorrectly, or if there was a huge tumor growing from that side of his head, which is common with these sightings. Johnny agreed with Terry on her description, except Johnny took it a little further. He began to describe to me something that made the hair stand up on the back of my neck. Johnny mentioned that one of these men was holding what seemed to be an arm, and I mean an arm only. The arm of a human person that had been snatched off a man or woman. He recognized it as a human arm because of the smaller size compared to the feral's arm, and also because Johnny is certain he saw a dirty cloth bracelet of some kind on the wrist of this arm. The feral lifted up the arm and took a huge bite out of this arm that he was holding. Johnny said the arm looked purple, swollen and decayed, and that the feral was carrying the arm around like it was a snack. Terry and Johnny smelled an awful smell, like dead deer carcass, as they stood up and ran inside. Terry is on the phone with the police while Johnny is getting his gun. Johnny ran back outside to shoot, but both the feral men were gone, but he saw some limbs in the trees still moving. Terry's on the phone with the police and is having a hard time explaining to the 911 operator what they saw. Other than the fright from these two creatures that appeared in the woods, they had concerns about the human arm and felt it was very pertinent for the police to know. Long story short, two officers came and they found nothing. The officers didn't quite believe them, but they agreed to search the area. Then Sunday came and Terry and Johnny attended church. Terry explained to me that while at church, she asked for a special prayer over her home and property and explained to the pastor that her and her husband felt that their home was being attacked by Satan and left it at that. After church, they returned to their cabin along with their two daughters and their spouses, with their two grandchildren. Terry and Johnny explained to their adult kids what happened the night before and exclaimed that she'd rather the grandkids not play outside. The day continues on as normal until around 8 p.m, not quite dark. Johnny is outside with his two son-in-laws when out of nowhere they smell an awful smell. They were all startled when a huge flock of birds rushed from the tree line, followed by 15 to 20 frogs leaping in a rush away from the woods. A family of deer suddenly jumped from the corner of the property, heading towards the back of the house, into the other side of the forest. The animals were running from something. Then something in the trees moves that grabs their attention. They see a creature standing, watching them. It's just standing there, looking. This time the creature was described as a 6-foot-tall, deformed man with huge shoulders, covered in mud and dirt, long black hair, evil face with white, cloudy eyes. In its hand was a dirty burlap sack that appeared to have something heavy in it. As they are staring at this monster, completely unable to move from shock, Terry walks outside. She noticed the birds from the kitchen window and wanted to see what was going on. She sees all three men staring straight ahead into the woods, completely still. She glances up, and that's when she also sees it. She said she felt the most evil presence she had ever felt, and worse than the night before. The creature only stared at them all, not moving an inch. It looked unreal, like a wax figure. No birds chirping and no sounds from the woods whatsoever. They said the silence and still from the forest was just as scary as seeing the creature. Terry, frustrated and terrified, yells at it to go away. Everyone is in panic mode and they all go inside of the house. One of the son-in-laws, Jeremy, grabs his cell phone to take a pic, and Johnny grabs his gun. Once again, when they return outside, the creature is gone, but the awful smell remains. Terry and Johnny are still completely mortified and don't feel safe. I came to investigate because this is absolutely terrifying. I've been in contact with law enforcement and with the Eastern Band of Cherokees to get permission to be on their land to do the investigation. The Cherokees simply know it's feral people and consider them evil, part creature, part human. I live in Colorado and like to spend my weekends in the mountains, fly fishing, hiking, camping, etc. I'm in my early 20s, so young I suppose, but I like to think I'm generally comfortable in the mountains, and I've seen quite a bit of what this state has to offer. My older brother is like me, but even more experienced in the mountain wilderness, and yesterday he and I decided to go fishing at a favourite hole of ours in the Holy Cross Wilderness. This area is fairly well trafficked, especially now as the aspens are all changing and lots of tourists come to see them. Blue skies, warmish weather, and he and I were just getting in the water when I first felt something was off. It's late morning at this point. Most people like to fish early morning, but this hole is blocked from the sun by a cliff face, and the fish don't usually start biting till closer to noon. Again, this is a favourite hole of ours, because despite the area having lots of hikers and day trippers, this part of the creek we're on takes some know-how and effort to hike to. So we're about half a mile away from where we park, and no one else is around. First thing I notice is very little wildlife ambience or background noise after we set up our rods and get in the water. As I'm wading in, I hear rocks above us on the cliff move, and a couple fall into the water no more than 50 feet from us. That's odd. In my probably 15 to 20 times at this spot, never have I witnessed a cliff fall apart as it appeared to have done. Beside the sound of the creek we're standing in, it's deathly quiet, and the sound of the rocks falling and hitting the water made us both leap. My brother turns around and we both look at the cliff face. There's a ledge above with trees, and I had never given it any thought before. But I realized then and there, I felt like someone not only could be up on that ledge, but my gut tells me there is. My brother, I can tell, seemed to be contemplating things too. He literally turned to me a minute after the rockfall and said, "Okay, that was weird, right?" I tell him yeah, and then I hesitantly told him, "Hey, it's quiet out today." Almost on cue, a rock lands in the water, this time in between us. I'm not kidding, we're near this cliff face, but not near it enough for a rock to just fall off and land between us. No, this rock had to have been propelled. We look up and we saw it, a person holding a rock in their hand, naked as all get out, with long brown hair. And as we're looking at him, it looked like he was grinning, and he throws the rock at us from above. It got close to hitting my brother, and immediately we're yelling, "What the hell?" and quickly wading back to the other side of the creek. My brother slipped, and the person must have thrown another rock at him because I heard a big kerplunk, and my brother is yelling bloody murder. I get on the bank and grabbed a rock in my hand and turned to throw it back at the person on the cliff. They're no longer there. Keeping my eyes on the cliff ledge, I offer my hand to my brother, as he's now soaked, and I pull him up onto the bank. He's pissed, saying he'll get his gun from the car and shoot the man, and saying he could have been killed. Now we're both back on the bank, looking up and expecting rocks to come flying, and sure enough, they do. we can't see who's throwing them. They're golf ball to football-sized rocks being tossed down one at a time. From memory, I counted a total of 7 rocks thrown at us after the initial rock slide. My brother throws a rock over the ledge, but I tell him we should move. We weave through the river willows, looking back over the foliage to keep an eye on the ledge, and then we hear it. A howl/blood-curdling scream from that direction. I don't see that being, but it had to have been it making the noise. We got back to the car and both started recollecting what we both experienced. We both figured it must have been some deranged homeless person or something, but it's not until I told my girlfriend when we got home last night that she told me about the feral people she hears about on TikTok. If anyone listens to this and can maybe help me understand what my brother and I were attacked by, I'd appreciate it. Neither of us were hit by the rocks, although my brother says the one I didn't see land was so close it splashed him and is why he fell in the water. I should note we drove to the National Park Ranger office and filed a report under my brother's name. He was told he'd be given a call today or early next week with any follow-up or questions they may need answered. Craziest shit I've ever experienced while out in the mountains. We're both already saying we may never go back to that hole again, and I already told a couple of buddies of mine that know the spot about what happened there. First off, I'm a medically retired veteran from Operation Iraqi Freedom and Operation Enduring Freedom, and I've also served in the US Federal Civil Service for Department of Defense, where I've carried secret, top secret, and TSSCI, top secret compartmentalized information, so I do not lie. I grew up on our 500 acres in southwestern West Virginia until I was 8 years old, and grew up for the rest of my life in North Carolina before signing up for the military in 2005 when I was 17 years old and needed parents' permission and signatures to join. Growing up in these regions, I've always heard stories of feral groups of people, especially in our remote Appalachian land, but never have we seen or heard anything sinister. Fast forward to when I moved to Washington State for my federal work. I've lived on the peninsula by the Olympic Mountains, which have more missing persons cases due to the strange location of being in between the Pacific Ocean and the very large Cascades mountain system, where the 14,400-foot volcano Mount Rainier resides. I lived in northern Washington State in Cascades as well, and you would think more mystery, sinister, and devious stories of murder, abduction, harassment, and missing persons altogether would be in the Cascades due to the size of the mountains, as well as the huge amount of square miles that the Cascades cover in the state. Literally 4 times the size of the Olympics. But the Olympics holds some of the most treacherous terrain within its desolate, protected wilderness, from its 70 miles of rugged, rocky coastlines filled with tiny islands, hills, rocks, and steep, jagged cliffs, to the treacherous Olympic mountain forests, filled with alpine forest, and the only rainforest in the continental US that I know of. No one lives within this protected US park, except for feral people, who do not want society anymore. In fact, one of the churches nearby on the peninsula had a ministry outreach for bringing food and supplies, and only one man knew how to find them, and was respected because one of his family members was part of the group. But he would warn how extremely dangerous it was to travel out there if you didn't know the area, people, and or carry sufficient tools and weapons. The Olympics literally have twice as many missing people as the Cascades, and even though they are smaller and cover a smaller amount of distance, they make up for it by having really unpredictable and unforgiving terrain and weather. And the weather part is what makes search and rescue very, very hard to navigate through because of the elevation and weird pressure systems from sitting in between the ocean and large sets of Cascade Mountains. The local government even denies that the region is less dangerous, but it is horse hockey. Many have gone missing, to never find a trace again. And many locals have spoken up about the murderers and feral people who live within the area, especially with quite a few people writing police reports of violence, threats, and even some poor woman who escaped and it is all hush-hush with local law enforcement and government security, intelligence and law enforcement agencies. But the people are talking, especially because quite a few missing were found deceased weeks, months and years later that are/were found in a paranormal and mysterious nature. All it takes is a refined search, and you can find many missing 411 cases from that specific area. All I have to say is that I have traveled, hiked and camped in both mountain ranges extensively, and I get way more creeped out over in the Olympics from these stories being shared, as well as getting caught in unpredictable weather patterns over really rough terrain. It is extremely dangerous in late fall, winter and early spring because Mother Nature brings rain, snow, wind, avalanches and mudslides. But yes, I tell you today that there is a 100% likelihood that there are feral/wild groups of humans surviving out there, and I have never felt compelled by God to assist them. Probably because my PTSD is bad, and I would cause more damage than good, so I only donated to them instead. Just be very careful, aware, and bring multiple items to protect yourself with, cause I promise, there are wild people who intend to do harm in both, as well as the entities that we know very little about. Too many screams and whoops heard and recorded, too many pictures, tracks, castings, too many eyewitness accounts, as well as tales from Native American tribal stories and legends for all of this to be made up. I can tell you, I've been watched more times than I care to admit, but I am a formidable opponent with weapons, and I'm very aware of my surroundings when venturing into backcountry, where I always travel in numbers. I wanted to share this so people become more aware of traversing backcountry safely. Knowledge is power, so arm yourself with knowledge, first and foremost. Pray for safety over yourself and your travel companions, and arm yourselves with weapons and survival equipment. I'm a hunter. I like to hunt wild boar specifically, though I have been deer hunting and have been known to get a turkey for Thanksgiving. I mostly hunt boar. For those of you that don't know, boar are a big problem in the United States. A sow can have 2 litters a year, and it's not uncommon for a litter to consist of 10 or more pigs. Given that pigs eat anything and everything, it's not hard to see why the Department of Fish and Wildlife makes it legal to hunt them with almost no restrictions. In my state, it's illegal to hunt most large mammals with night or thermal vision scopes, with the exception of boar and coyote. I've been saving for a year, mostly fun money. It's hard to explain to your wife that a scope that costs literally twice as much as the rifle I was mounting it on was worth it. But I did it. I took it to a range and sighted it in. There was an area that was prepped with boar activity that I knew would be perfect for a night hunt. It was easily accessible with my truck, with easy to find spots that I could set up in that overlooked a large, easy to navigate clearing. The night started uneventful, mostly me tinkering with my new toy, cycling through the settings. I was a little impatient. I'd spotted multiple deer, but they were out of season, and like I mentioned earlier, my current setup wasn't legal for deer. I moved to another spot I'd seen days earlier that probably wasn't much better than my first, but it gave me something to do, and a new angle to look around with my new scope. After an hour or so of glassing the area, it dawned on me. This spot doesn't have much animal activity at all. No rabbits or owls. The deers that I'd seen were hundreds of yards from where I was. Why was this packet of land so dead at night but lively in the day? I'd set up around 10 PM and it was about 2 AM when I started to think about packing up, maybe setting up a target before I left, and taking some practice shots. I heard a crunch come from the direction I came from before. I panned my scope over and saw the silhouette of a small bear pushing through the bushes. It's important to note that my scope isn't exactly night vision. It's a thermal scope, kinda like a black and white version of what you see in the Predator movies. I adjusted my range and zoomed in a little. I remember jolting a little when I saw that it wasn't really a bear. It was a man. Because he was so low and hunched over, I thought I was looking at a young bear. Is that a game warden? It couldn't be. I would have seen the headlights coming from the road from where I was perched. And where would he have walked from? It was 30 miles away from anything and on public lands. I was about to call out when I adjusted my sights and noticed he was naked. No shoes, pants, or anything. I remember being disturbed by his movements, like a squirrel or something. Twitchy and grabbing at the foliage, sniffing around and palming the tree. Was that my tree? The one I'd been leaning against earlier? The thought terrified me. Could he smell me? Then he did something I still have nightmares about today. He squatted and placed his hands in the dirt between his feet and stared straight up like a dog mid-howl. And I heard it. A voice coming from that direction. A very compelling female voice. "Help! I'm lost!" There was a long pause, but neither of us moved a muscle. The center of my sights was trained at the dirt in front of his feet. I couldn't bring myself to aim directly at another person. It went against everything I'd been taught about firearms. Were they lost? Was this some guy that had gone crazy out here? Why was his voice so feminine? "Help, please! I can't walk!" The voice called out. That's when I called bullshit. Not only could he walk, when I first saw him, he was traversing the land with ease for a naked person. So good, I mistook him for a bear. That's a trap. This guy is trying to lure me to him with a damsel in distress routine. Luckily, the lack of activity before had caused me to pack up most of my gear. I think I may have left behind a hat and a sitting pad, but I didn't give a shit in that moment. I took my eyes off him for a moment to get my pack on. I buckled my chest strap and scrambled for my rifle. To my horror, he was in the same position, but his face was staring in my direction, and I swear, I saw him smile. How the hell had he heard me get up and put my gear on? He must have been 150 yards away. "Fuck off!" I screamed in that direction. He stood upright, and then it hit me how tall and skinny he was. Easily 6 feet and very lean. He took a couple of long strides in my direction, and I instinctively sent a round sailing above his head into the tree line. He was freaky as hell, but he hadn't really threatened me. Why would I tell the cops? I was unwilling and unready to shoot someone. He stopped dead in his tracks and hunched down on all fours. "The next one will mess you up. Go away." He stayed on all fours, and this time I had my sights trained on the center of him. His eyes were just above the grass, like a large cat or something. I was trying to stop my trembling and knew that my voice had cracked a little on that last warning. I was terrified. That standoff probably only lasted a minute or two, maybe less, but it felt like forever. In an instant, he bolted left towards the tree line, opposite the road. So much for not being able to walk. I could barely keep him in my scope, he was moving so fast. He disappeared into the brush, and I sent another bullet sailing high in his direction. I racked another round and tried to pocket that mag and swap for a fresh one, but I dropped it and didn't bother looking for it. I wasn't far from my truck, and I wanted to get out of there. I could hear him in the distance, yelling in this weird sound that could have been a laugh or a cry. I scrambled up the trail and arrived at my truck breathless. I tossed my gear into the cab, but kept the rifle in the passenger seat and sped off. For the longest time, I have told that story from the perspective of having spotted some deranged crackhead living off the land like some kind of caveman. I reported it to Fish and Game, but all they did was scold me for hunting at night alone. Never received an update. It wasn't until I told this story at a camping trip that my nephew told me about wendigos, rakes, and skinwalkers. My story scared the piss out of him because the spot we were camping was technically the same forest I'd seen the bastard, just 50 miles east of it. He was so spooked, his mum, my cousin, had to take him home. She was really pissed. I've gone down the rabbit hole on these scary stories, I'm not saying what I saw definitely was a Wendigo or a skinwalker. I'm saying that if such a thing exists, I may have dodged quite the bullet that night. Or maybe it was just a tweaker being Donnie Thornberry in the middle of the night. Either way, I thought I'd share. I was hiking in the Olympic National Forest a few years ago, by myself and my 2 dogs. We were 4 days in, around 20 miles at least as the crow flies from even an unknown mountain road. I was camping at around 7,000 feet that night, or right where the tree line started thinning out. So when we got to the campsite, a big open meadow on top of a secondary mountain, it was about an hour from sunset. My big dog usually runs around within proximity of the camp as I put the tent up and make dinner, etc. But I noticed this time was a little different. He kept staring up this steep, tree-filled mountainside, tail straight up and barking. Not the bark when he sees marmots, not the excited, high-pitched barks, but unsure, concerned barks. Now, the day before I had found a note left under a rock at the last landmark, saying that there was a problem bear in the area that was harassing a party of campers a few days ago, and I myself had seen big cat tracks the day before. So I was rightfully concerned that this may be more than just ground squirrels. I decided to go climb some of the boulders at the foot of the hill, while I took my time looking up the hillside for movement, before I went to go hang my bear bag up there. They were the only trees around to hang the bag. I didn't see or hear anything, but my dog kept quietly whining like there was something up there. So while still concerned, I start hiking up this steep hill to hang the bag. It was so steep, I had to use the trees to balance and lean against, so I didn't go tumbling down, before making another 5-6 push steps to the next tree I could lean against. Anyway, I'm slowly making it up this hill/ridge, hopping from tree to tree to keep my balance. Then I get about 100 feet up the hill, and I hear a whole lot of big movement about 50 feet in front of me. My dog immediately goes from a deep, low growl to a savage, slobber flying everywhere type barking now. My heart starts pounding out of my chest, and I start to panic. A million thoughts go racing through my head in the matter of seconds, because if this is a bear, my dog is going to try and save me, in which he will most likely die. And I'm stuck here. If I have to get off that hillside fast, I almost 100% am going to trip and fall the 12 to 15 foot cliff onto the boulders below, like hundreds of 5 to 20 foot boulders. So I'm feeling pretty screwed about now. Then I hear my other little dog start barking and freaking out down at the campsite, which was just out of sight. I had zipped her in my tent, so she didn't wander off while I was away. So yeah, I'm absolutely panicking at this point. A few seconds after, I kind of snap back to it, and I take another few seconds to start to put my survival priorities in order and call my dog back to me. He comes and sits against my feet as my back is against a tree, so I'm kind of pinned and stuck there for a moment. But my dog was seemingly trying to separate me from something up there, so I let him lean against me while I tried to collect myself. This is when I realized I had completely forgot that I had my headlamp on. I reach up so fast to turn my lamp on, I basically punch myself in the face. I'm having some serious adrenaline dumps going right now, so much so that my knees are starting to shake. I get my lamp on and peer up the hillside. I figure I'll at least get a reflection off the eyes of whatever is up there. Peering, nothing. But I had just heard something. We both did. And whatever it was, it didn't get far away, or sound like it had made it too far. I knew something was there. So I'm kind of just steadfast at this point. I need to know what is up there, because I have to sleep here tonight. And you know, I'm out in the middle of nowhere, alone. Better face it than wait like a sitting duck all night, is my thought process. So yeah, I'm looking up this hill, and at one point my dog lunges forward, unpinning me. he does a fake bluff charge up the hill about 15 feet, and I mean he's snarling and foaming at the mouth at this point. As he does this, I finally see movement. Something moving up and breaking the line of the horizon and slash sunset. My dog's bluff made whatever it was blow its cover. I'm so zeroed in. I call my dog back and silently watch, and what I make out made my heart completely drop. There was a man crouched about 75 feet directly in front of me, wearing not camo clothes, but some raggedy shit with a hood that blended into the environment perfectly. Actually, almost like a makeshift guile suit, but with his face exposed. I couldn't see his eyes, and his face was covered in dirt or something, but I knew we were staring right at each other at that moment. So I stare, for what seems like minutes. No words. I felt like I was going to subconsciously convey that I was going to stand my ground. I wanted him to know I saw him, but I guess I was too shaken to speak. As I'm staring, my little dog back at the campsite starts barking her head off again, like she was scared. I also had to get off that hill before total dark, or I could be seriously hurt or even risk dying trying to get back down. So carefully I start heading down the hill with my dog, who doesn't want to leave but listens. Periodically I would stop with my back against a tree holding me up, and look in that direction again just to make it even more clear that I saw him. And eventually I make it down to the boulders at the bottom. By the time I finally jumped down and hit the boulders, my little dog had stopped barking. I could only see the top of my tent from the bottom of the boulders. I thought she was barking just to bark. Dachshunds do that. Or just barking back at my dog. But when I got there, my little dog had somehow got out of the tent and was walking around the camp growling, with her tail sticking straight out. Still trying to hold it together, I thought, okay, maybe she just got her nose between the zippers and worked her way out. But I was positive I had zipped it, so that the zipper tab, an opening, was at the very top of the tent door, out of reach. So in a mixture of being terrified, pissed off, and the feeling of needing to do something, I reached into my day bag and pulled out my gun. I fire a single shot into the air as the sun was setting, climb into my tent without eating, and lay with my gun next to me until first light. As soon as the sun came up, I was packing up my shit and leaving, heading back down the mountain. It sucks. It was all downhill back, but I still couldn't cover the ground to get back to my car in one day. It was dark by the time I made it to the last camp, about 4 miles from my vehicle. But thankfully, there were other people there. We sat around the fire they made, and I felt pretty relieved and safe. They start to tell me that they are planning to head that way, where I was the night before in the morning. So I tell them both the story in detail. Needless to say, we were both walking back to our cars in the morning. Screw all that. The thing that still creeps me out to this day, though, is when I got home and started reading reviews of the same hike I was on. Other people had similar experiences like mine as well. Even a man found dead from a fall around the same boulder range 2 years ago, and a woman found murdered last year.
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.